Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain today. This is a little different than we've done in the past. We're going to be making a sequence of 3 videos covering Jadam Microorganism Solution, or JMS. We're going to be doing the first video sequence, which is how we put it together, how we actually make it, and then we'll do 2 other videos following up the actual brew process as well as the application. Question would be number 1 that might be on people's minds, besides what is JMS, which we will explain later in the video, but what is it you're trying to do with it? What we're trying to do is increase the biological diversity in our soil, particularly as we apply it on the plants. And the idea is it will improve the plant's ability to grow by improving the soil. So that's our focus and what we're trying to work on. So let's get into it and start the process. Okay, let's start first with some definitions and explaining what this is. Jadam Microorganism Solution, or JMS, is an anaerobically steeped tea. It's not, in a sense, it is not the same in any way as you would normally think a compost tea is. This is more taking the biology that's in a very small inoculum of either leaf mold soil or soil that's right below a compost pile and steeped in a water. Basically, rainwater is the best, or a softened water works as well. Hard water tends not to show as much biologic action, but it still will work too. But what it is that bacteria and the actinomycetes and all the other protozoa lives that are in that leaf mold soil are basically grown for a period of 36 to, can be, depending on the temperature, as long as 60 hours in a water solution that has, as its only feed source, potato starch. And then in addition to the potato starch, we also add in sea salt to give it a slight mineral content that the microbes can use while they're propagating themselves in this brew. And so it's totally different than when somebody makes compost teas. Most of them are aerated, actively aerated compost teas, where they have a bubbler in it or they have some kind of vortex going where the water is in constant motion. In this case, what we're going to do is when we mix this up, we just set it aside at ambient temperatures if you're in the spring, late spring and into early fall, or in the winter time with a small like aquarium heater in it, which would heat the solution to about 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The whole point on this is you don't want to disturb it once you do the mixing in, and the idea is this material then is used as a soil drench, whereas most activated aerated compost teas, people, when they get finished with them after the brew cycle, will either use it as a foliar feed or they'll use it, as a soil drench as well. This focus here, what we're trying to do is get this biology into the soil itself. So we're trying to basically brew up what's in that leaf mold soil or compost soil and get a large dose of very diverse bacteria and protozoas and things into the soil where our plants are growing or going to be growing. So what do we need to use? In this part of the video, what we're going to show is what we're going to do to make the feedstock, which is the sea salt and the potato. Now,
any kind of potato?
That is something that I have just found on experimenting with this, that it appears to be that the best type of potato is a spring potato, such as like a red potato, a very thin-skinned potato, like a Yukon Gold as well. Either those early to mid-season potatoes seem to perform better for me, although you can use a russet or a late potato, late storage potato. What we're doing is we're taking the potato and we're boiling it until it is cooked, just like you would if you were trying to make a potato salad. And it seems, though, that the bacteria really grow very well on the non-russet potato, which tends to have a little bit more coarser flesh to it. If you think about how like a spring potato is or a new potato is, it tends to have a very soft flesh and almost melts in your mouth. I think what happens with this, even when blended up, that these materials tend to be smaller and act as the starch material seems to break up maybe a little bit easier in the water, and it seems from my experience in making these things that it makes a better brew.
Organic or regular?
That is important. Organic potato, you either want to have potatoes you raise yourself without any chemicals. A lot of potatoes, when you buy them, the commercial potatoes that are non-organic, they use a lot of fungicides. Because potatoes are susceptible to many types of diseases, blight diseases and things of that nature. So commercial potatoes, particularly the russet potatoes, tend to have a lot of these fungicidal residues in it. And these bacteria and things that we're using from the soil inoculant are very sensitive to that. And I have, in using non-organic potatoes, gotten very poor results, very inconsistent results. But when I switch to the organic potato and using potato that is, like I said, the earlier potato, the results have been much better. And when I look under the microscope, I see more diversity. So there is enough residual, I think, that it does make a difference. Now, one of the other things, particularly if you've read any of Young Sang Cho's book and Jadam, he says you can use, quite a bit of potato if you want. That you can use more potato. He doesn't really specify exactly, what the maximum limit of potato is, but he does talk about the minimum. And what I have found in experimenting with this, that using the minimum gets a better product. And think about it from the standpoint, if you're putting in too much food into an environment, certain bacteria are going to grow faster than others and deplete the oxygen faster, and it's going to change the dynamics of what you're trying to get out of your JMS. In other words, it may become more anaerobically bacterially dominated with maybe less protozoas or less diversity of other things like actinomycetes or something like that. So if the oxygen level drops very, very fast, the other bacteria and things that maybe work a little bit slower, don't have that time to develop fast enough before the oxygen drops off. This is a theory I have, because what I have noticed is when I was using twice as much potato as I'm using now, as an example, I would get a poorer result, less diversity, and it would not tend to brew up the same. So what is the minimum? Basically, what it works out to is approximately 2 to 4 grams of potato to a liter of water. And so if you're somewhere in that zone between 2 to 4 grams, it tends to give a pretty good result. So what I have done is I tend to shoot for, when I'm making a 4-gallon bucket of this JMS, I tend to shoot for putting 60 gram of potato in it, which gives me approximately 4 grams per liter. 4 grams per liter. And that is more than enough food, but it's not so much food that it causes things to get out of balance really quick. The other thing that we add into the solution of the 15 liters is sea salt. Now, if you put too much salt in, it's going to throw things out of balance from your plants and etc. So the whole thing is you're actually diluting this down by putting 1 gram of sea salt in per liter of water. So if you stay to that ratio, what you're doing is you're really dropping the percentage of actual sodium, because it's sodium chloride is in the salt, but there's also a very large amount of other minerals in sea salt. There can be up to 83 or maybe even more minerals of all kinds of things that plants can use. And that's what you're really targeting to get to, keeping the sodium and the chloride levels down low enough, but these other minerals are available to the plant. And most of these micronutrients, plants and microbiology need very, very small amounts. So 1 gram of this doesn't really cause any problems in terms of once you get ready to put the JMS on the soil, you're diluting it usually again, you're not putting it on straight. So you get a lot of dilution relative to this, but it provides an availability of micronutrients to the bacteria and things that are growing in the solution. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take our boiled potato and see if we're in the weight area. This is a pretty small guy, so I'm thinking we're probably pretty close to the, oh, look at that, 60 on the dot. Wow, okay, this can happen, but this is perfect. So we don't need to do anything, cut anything off or add anything on. We got more than enough. We'll just set that aside for a second. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to weigh out 15 grams of sea salt. Got 11.
14.
One more.
A little more. Still a little more. Not changing.
There it is.
There's 15.
15 grams. Okay. So that we're going to add to the water in the brew bucket. So we'll just set that aside at this point. Scales off. Okay. So one of the things that I've found is when you read the Jadam book, he says, well, you just put the potato in a mesh sack, like a sock or something like that, and then just kind of, massage it into the water. You can do that, but he also kind of notes that, well, you could use a mixer and just blend it up really well. And what I found was, when you're using just like hand massaging the potato starch into the water, it tends to not get in as complete form that's as useful. It's like some of it gets in, maybe 80% of it gets in. So instead of that, what I do is I use just one of these small stick mixers, and I'll break the potato up. I put in maybe a cup of water into a pot, and then what I'll do is I'll just kind of hand break up the potato a little bit so it's ready to just put that in the water. And then as a last step, I'll use the mixer here. Okay, so it's all mixed up now and it's liquefied, and basically this is now in a form that can be really easily mixed into the brew bucket. And there isn't much more to it, just takes a couple of minutes to get them kind of blended up. So you puree it. If you didn't have a hand mixer, you could just use a blender or a Cuisinart or something with a little water. And the whole idea is to get it into a pureed slurry that's not too thick that you can't pour it, but you don't need a lot of extra water in it either at this point. Now, some people may say, okay, well, why don't you just add the salt to it at this point? I've tested that, and what I have found is that I get a better dissolution of the salt if I mix it with a little hot water ahead of time to get the salt to dissolve, and then mix it into the bucket of the brew water before adding the food and the inoculant. So you can do it. You can put it all into one and just throw it all in at once, but this is kind of cold in a sense that it's room temperature. And by using the hot water, you get a little bit better, you get the solution to dissolve, so then it can be more evenly mixed in the brew bucket is kind of the approach that I've taken. So let's take this outside now to the brew bucket, and we'll do the last couple of steps to get it going. Okay, so now we're at the mix stage. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna dissolve the salt in some hot water. We got a little hot water heater here in the greenhouse. So we'll just put, it doesn't have to be a whole lot. And so we're just gonna, as you can see, it looks a little cloudy in it right now. but it's dissolving, and I'm going to just kind of gently swirl it around until all that granular stuff there is dissolved in the solution. And then once that's dissolved, then it's going to be a lot easier to get it mixed into the brew bucket. Okay, you can see now we got it all dissolved in it. So this is ready to be added to the brew bucket. In the brew bucket we have with 4 gallons of rainwater in it. So let's just go over and get this mixed in. We're going to want to make certain that we get it well mixed into the water itself. So when we pour it in, it's just a matter of getting it in. And then I just kind of use the tray, just kind of like a big spatula, and just kind of mix it. Give it a few stirs. Okay, and then that should be in there fairly well dissolved. Since we're filming this and brewing this in January, our nighttime temperatures, even with a small space heater in the greenhouse, still get down to about 45. And the daytime temps with good ventilation in here will be maybe 65 degrees. So this is a really pretty cool greenhouse. It's very slow when you get temperatures that are below 68 degrees for the biology to go through its process of replicating and getting, full diversity into it. So during this time of year, what we do is we'll put the brew over a 2-inch insulated foam board on the bottom and a 2-inch on the back, and inside of the actual brew bucket itself we put approximately a small aquarium heater. These things you can get at Amazon or whatever. They're not very expensive. This particular one can heat water up to 10 gallons, so it's anywhere from 5 gallons to 10 gallons. It's not a problem for it. Connected to this is a thermostat that we actually used for heat mats, but it really has a more sensitive control to it because it has a temperature thermocouple that we also put in the bucket. So even though there's a temperature thermocouple on the aquarium heater, we tend to set that to about 80 degrees so that it will cap out. It won't go any higher than that if this thing for some reason decided to not do its job. So there's no way the temperature can run way far ahead or drop too far below. This has a very tight temperature setting to it. You can set it to within 1 degree and it will heat it perfectly. Okay, now it may not show because this is an electronic LED type device, and so it has a pulse to it, so it may not show perfectly on the camera, but it has a digital display that shows the temperature of the solution as it is right now, and it's sitting at 74 degrees, which is perfect. If it drops below 72, it turns the heater on. So if it goes above 74, it turns the heater off. So we can keep this within like 2 degrees, which is perfect for the brew of what we're trying to get to. So we've added the salt to the mixture, stirred it up, temperature is set. You may notice also too around the bucket we have a frost blanket, and we're just using some scrap Agribon 50, and this is a way to just insulate the side of the bucket as well as once we get finished we'll put a lid over the top and we'll bring the blanket over the top of that too. So it keeps the heat trapped in it. So that's the whole point. Because we don't have to do anything after we add everything here. It's basically the biology is going to take care of itself. So now let's go to the next step of adding the inoculum and the food and setting it up and letting it do its thing. Okay, this is the bucket of the compost soil we harvested a while back. And as you can see, it's got a little bit of biology on the top of it. We just keep it in the dark with a rag over the top. It's not really dry, but it's not really moist. I mean, from the standpoint of like wet. But it has enough moisture in it to keep the biology alive. So if it starts to get dry as things go forward, we'll just add more water to it. You can also, I found, feed this material actually quite easy. If you're worried about it, like it's been sitting too long and there's nothing more for the biology to eat in this thing, and then maybe it's going to start going dead. I just added oats. I took the material out and I added basically, I think it was about 3 cups of oatmeal. Just regular organic oatmeal, nothing fancy in it. Make sure you don't use conventional oatmeal or conventional oats, because they do tend to desiccate the grain when we're getting ready for harvest using Roundup, which has strong antimicrobial well, it's basically a bactericide.
Steel cut?
Steel cut is fine. Crimped is fine. I just used regular rolled oatmeal because it was cheap. It was the cheapest. And you don't need to use much of this to get an inoculation. So for this 4-gallon bucket of JMS, I'm only going to use 20 grams of this actual soil as an inoculant, which when you get down to it isn't much. So we'll turn the scale on here. You'll be surprised at how little it takes to get to 20 grams. That's it. So if you look at that and you go, wow, that's as much as he's taking to make one 4-gallon batch of a JMS, which when he uses it in the field, when we use it in the field, we'll dilute that down. And as an example, 3 gallons of water, we'll add basically 15 tablespoons of the JMS. So you can start to do the math here pretty fast and see that this 20 grams of inoculant is going to create a lot of microbiology. So that's why this 3-gallon pail will probably last us a good year. So probably once every month or so, I'll come out and I'll kind of disturb it a little bit and add those oats into it just to kind of give it and bring it up with a little more moisture just to keep it going. And then I'm going to store it in a cool, dark place. When I say cool, I'm talking about, keeping it around 50 to 55.
Is it going into our root cellar?
Yeah, that'd be a perfect place for it. If you couldn't, use a root cellar and say you had a cooler of some kind that you're keeping at 35 to 40, that would be okay. But it might be, it would tend to eat any food you put into it a lot slower because you're really lowering the microbiology level down. You want to have a certain amount of activity, you kind of want to be at least 55 to 60 to get it. Now what we don't want to do is we don't want to stoke this to the point where the biology just takes off. So that's why we want to keep it as relatively in a cool, damp place. So for the winter time, it's perfect out here in the greenhouse. Everything's perfect. Okay, so what's the most effective way we have found to get the food and the inoculant into the brew bucket without basically creating a bunch of muck down at the bottom of it? We use a paint strainer bag. You could use a sock or something of that, or an old nylon or something of that nature. It doesn't have to be that. We just get these at Home Depot, and they're like, you can get a pack of them for a couple of bucks. And it's just a fine nylon mesh. So it's going to be pretty resistant to the biology and chemicals working on it and that sort of thing. And it's easy to clean. So when you're finished with it, you can take it out, wash it off, and you get multiple uses out of it. So what we're going to do is just, first thing is we're going to put the inoculum into the bag. Make sure we get it all in there as much as we can. Okay, now the next step, once we got this in the bag, we're going to go over to the brew bucket and we're going to pour the potato puree through the bag as we're mixing it in the water. So it's going to be kind of a simultaneous type thing. And then the last step we're going to do, I'm just going to talk about it here, is we're going to bind the bag up with a zip tie, and we're just going to suspend what's left in the brew bucket over, just like we're going to hook this to a stick that's resting on the top of the brew bucket, and then this will actually be in the brew water itself. Okay, what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of gently put this in the water, and you can kind of see Then the last step is I'm going to put in the potato puree. I'm pouring it directly into the bag. That way any of the skins that are in the potato puree aren't going to be suspended in the water. And I'm just going to take a little bit of the water, kind of mix it around. Oh, there we go, got it in. All right, the next step is I'm just going to make sure that this material is really well mixed into the brew bucket itself. So I'm just going to kind of like spin it around, and you can kind of see the potato stuff is getting suspended in the water. I'll just also massage the bag a little bit, get the biology out of the material. And the color of the water is turning a little bit, kind of reflecting any of the humic acids or other things, organic materials that might, are fine enough to get through the mesh bag. But that is basically it. That's the mixing process. And what it's going to do is any solids that are in the water that might have escaped from the bag are going to settle down to the bottom very quickly. So we'll check back probably at about somewhere between 17 and 24 hours to see what things look like. But my experience has been anything that the color on this will lighten back up, in the first 24 hours. But it'll be kind of a cloudy look to it, a little bit opaque. But that's the biology working on the starches and things of that nature. So our last step is we're just going to suspend the bag, what's left in it, into the solution itself. And what I do is I just use some reusable zip ties, and I've got 2 of them here. And what I do is it creates on one side just basically a kind of a loop. And then I've got a plain old stick. It's just a little piece of molding that I got. And let me just make sure that's zip tied tight so it doesn't go anywhere. And I don't want this plastic in the water per se. So that's basically it. The material is hanging in the bag, so anything that's left that it didn't get massaged into the water still has access to kind of, go through the water. And in the first 24 hours, like I said, the first thing that's going to happen is material is going to settle down, and then we're going to start to see some small bubble formation. And what we'll do is we'll come back and check this at about 24 hours, probably tomorrow afternoon. It's about 3:30 right now. So we'll check it again somewhere between 2 and 3:30, and we'll talk about what's going on in it at that point. Okay, last thing we're going to do here for tonight is we're just going to put a lid slightly ajar on the top of it, and it's open to the back, so if there's any venting that needs to go on, it goes on. And then we're just going to drape over the top. This is the Agribon 50, and make sure it's around the sides. And it doesn't have to be super, in this case where we are right now, that should give it enough insulation that the solution is at 73 degrees right now, which is perfect, and it should just go on and do its thing all night. Okay, so folks may wonder, why are you going through all this effort? Why don't you just apply compost on the soil and, water it in? It's good enough, right? Yes and no. What we're doing here is we're actually brewing up. We're taking an inoculant and we're leveraging up the biology that's in that soil interface between the compost, where the compost pile ends and the soil begins. So there's quite a bit of diversity in that. And what we're trying to do is brew up a good section of that and then apply it where our plants are growing as a soil drench. So the idea is that yes, this is somewhat of an anaerobic mix, but I would say it's not totally anaerobic because we're not taking something that sat for 2 or 3 weeks and all the biology in it consumed all the oxygen and there's nothing left in there except weird stuff. This still, what we're doing is we're going to harvest this at its peak, and we'll talk about how we identify what the peak is, but but once we get it at its peak, it has a large amount of biology in it that will function well, just below the surface level, probably 3 inches to 12 inches down. So the idea is this is going to go down into the root zone, and we're going to be doing this on a repetitive basis about once every 2 weeks. So we're going to continually keep adding this material in to aid the plants. This biology then will help in terms of getting more diversity into the plant root zone, and we'll probably, with the protozoas and things of that nature, we'll start consuming some more of the bacteria and things that are growing in our soil and release more nutrients for the plants in the plant zone. So it's going to be kind of a combination. If the plants get more materials, they'll grow more, they'll put in more exudates, and we'll just kind of keep the cycle going.
How deep into the season?
You can apply this material year-round.
How long are we going? Every 2 weeks till?
We'll be doing it particularly on things that are our perennial cut flower crops, like our Dusty Miller and our mums and our scented geraniums. We're going to look at that first. We're also applying it to our spring ranunculus and anemones and early snapdragons. So we're seeing a really good response so far in what we have been putting this on for the last 3 months. Particularly in our hoop house 4, what we've noticed is the compaction layer that we used to have at about 10 inches down is disappearing. We have many areas now in that hoop house 4 where we're growing our overwintered snaps and our ranunculus, where now when we do a compaction test to see where that compaction level begins, it's down now anywhere from 17 to, I've gone as far as 26 inches on one of them. So this material is drenching in and is working in a lower oxygen levels as it goes further down, and it is creating a softer soil. The other thing that we noticed with it in applying it to ranunculus and snapdragons is we are watering less this winter than we have in the past. So it appears that the plants are getting a more effective, somehow through the biology that's going in the soil, they're more effectively pulling in water, and the organic material is retaining more water. So it seems to be there's a positive here, that the soils aren't drying out like they were, and it's working really well. So that's what we're going to be using it for, and we're going to be showing you, once this batch is finished, how we actually apply it on our mums. Okay, so what we did in this video is we worked on the actual brew and making the material itself, and hopefully this helped you guys understand the ins and outs. The most important thing, quality of water. You want to use either rainwater or softened water, or a water that isn't too hard. It functions much better. Secondly, you don't need as much food, and you don't need as much inoculum. There's lots of people you see maybe on YouTube where they go, well, I got this bucket, and I put in 2 or 3 big potatoes, and then I put in a big handful of soil. You don't need that much to get the response. So that's important. So you can get your materials will go much further. Always important, use organic potatoes. Do not use conventional potatoes. Very important. So those things being said, what we'll do is on the next video is we'll show you the actual application itself. So thanks for coming along today, and as always, stay safe out there, and I hope you guys have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.